The fake heiress and I were both throwing up at the same time. She clutched her stomach, looking down her nose at me. I'm carrying the child of New York's golden boy. My parents were ecstatic, praising her for being so clever. Then they turned on me, disgusted by my lack of self-respect, saying I'd ruined any chance of a good marriage. Then, one day, someone from the golden boy's family arrived. But it wasn't the heir. It was his uncle, the true patriarch of the family empire. He strode toward me, a look of concern on his face. Are you still mad at me? I had a stomach bug and went to the doctor. Next thing I know, some gossip has started a rumor that I'm pregnant. When I got home, before I could even explain, the fake heiress, Sophie, was already clinging to my mom's arm, looking wronged. Mom, is Isabelle doing this on purpose to spite me? I get pregnant, so she has to pretend she's pregnant too. Seriously? Since when is getting pregnant a competition? Besides, I'm not even pregnant. Sophie then proudly whipped out a lab report and announced, Mom, Dad, I'm carrying the heir to the Grant family fortune. She even puffed out her flat stomach, looking incredibly smug. Isabelle, I heard you were getting pretty cozy with that creep from back home before you came to the city. You're a real embarrassment to the Caldwells. Our family? She certainly made herself at home. Then again, even though she's the fake daughter, my parents treat her like the apple of their eye. In contrast to me, the actual daughter, they spent a fortune grooming Sophie, all in the hopes she'd marry into a wealthy family. And now me? I was brought back a month ago, and the first thing they did was lecture me about arranged marriages. They called it making up for lost time by seeing me settled. Yeah, right. All they wanted was for me to snag a rich husband for them in high society. I had to laugh. I wasn't pregnant, but I was being accused of it. I'd barely even spoken to that town delinquent, but Sophie had me in an illicit affair with him. It was absurd. Clearly, my parents couldn't care less about my explanation. They immediately started grilling Sophie for the details of her pregnancy. Sophie, blushing, explained that a month ago, on the night the Grant heir, Kevin, returned to the country, she proactively went to his room and sealed the deal. She then announced proudly, I've already sent word to the Grants. I'm sure they'll be sending someone over to discuss the wedding any day now. My parents' faces lit up. My dad, especially, looked at her with pure admiration. That's our Sophie. Always knows how to help the family. Then he shot me a disgusted look. Not like your sister. You can really tell she's from the countryside. No self-respect at all. If word of this gets out, how will our family ever show its face in public? Sophie reveled in my humiliation. Dad, Isabelle grew up in the middle of nowhere. She's probably not used to city life. That guy from back home may not have finished middle school, but his family owns a factory and just got a huge settlement from a property buyout. They've got some money. Why don't we have them come propose? They can use the settlement money as a wedding gift to you too. It would be Isabelle's way of showing her gratitude. Her little speech was music to my mother's ears. Sophie, you're so thoughtful. It's clear you were raised by us. That's a great idea. Let's get Isabelle married off and back to the countryside as soon as possible. We can't have her embarrassing us and ruining Sophie's engagement to the Grant heir. My mother's thoughtful planning was astounding. In just a few sentences, this family had decided my future without even asking me. I shot a cold glance at the three of them. Fearing they might not understand plain English, I enunciated each word carefully. I am not pregnant. If you don't believe me, I can go get a full medical exam. But my father cut me off. Are you trying to cause more trouble? Sophie already said the Grants are coming to discuss the wedding. We need to prepare. His words sent a chill down my spine. The Grants? I'd love to see when the Grants show up to propose. If I remember correctly, if Sophie wants to marry into that family, she'll have to get my permission first. They chattered on, planning to sell off my future like it was nothing. What a joke. Just as I was about to fire back, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Alex Grant. "What are you up to, Irene?" "Speak of the devil. The heir's uncle." Perfect. I had all this anger with nowhere to direct it. My thumbs flew across the screen, furious. "I want to hit someone." Alex sent back a gif of a cute cat apologizing, followed by a Venmo payment. "Irene, I know. I was wrong." His message made me laugh. I texted back, "Wrong about what?" "I have to tell you in person." Ugh, classic older man tactics. Looking up at my picture-perfect family and their sickeningly sweet act, I felt a wave of nausea. I smirked and looked my dad straight in the eye. "Okay, then. You guys get everything ready. I'll just wait for Sophie to marry into the Grant family." In her dreams. The so-called Grant heir, Kevin, might have a big reputation, but he's always been a little scared of me. After all, I used to beat him up all the time when we were kids. With that, I stood up, smoothed out my dress, and went to my room. After seeing so much ugliness, I needed to cleanse my eyes with a picture of my Alex. As soon as I flopped onto my bed, I video called him. He answered instantly. He must have just finished a board meeting. He was still in his suit and tie, complete with gold-rimmed glasses. He looked like a total dreamboat, the handsome, untouchable type. But the moment his cool eyes landed on me, they softened. A smile played on Alex's lips. "My Princess Irene is looking especially beautiful today." I couldn't help but smile back. "Humph. Don't think you can sweet-talk your way out of this. Fess up. What were you wrong about?" He was always the first to apologize, for anything and everything. Alex shrugged with a look of helpless amusement. A man's jealousy is a virtue. So is admitting he's wrong. I rolled my eyes at him. All I did was look at a cute underclassman for 2 seconds, and he threw a fit of jealousy that could curdle milk. He started laying it on thick. "Irene, I miss you. I'll come find you as soon as I wrap things up here in a few days, okay?" I snorted. "Dream on." I hung up and blocked him again. Can't let an old fox like him get too comfortable. I still remember the first time I met Alex. He was so cold and imposing that even the neighborhood dogs would tuck their tails and run. How did he turn into this big, goofy golden retriever who's always acting cute? Suddenly, my phone started buzzing with Venmo notifications. A series of transfers from Alex started rolling in, each with the memo, a gift. A smile tugged at my lips. Handsome and rich. That was my first impression of him. Looking back, it's funny how we met. When I was a kid, I escaped from kidnappers and was lucky enough to be taken in by an old woman in the countryside. I started learning traditional medicine from her. I was a quick study, I'd pick up techniques after just a few lessons. Alex's mother, Mrs. Grant, was staying in the village to recover from a heart condition. She would often ask the old woman for acupuncture when she wasn't feeling well, and that's how I got to know her. One day, the old woman was out helping someone in the next village, so I filled in. Alex was only 16 then, at the peak of his arrogant, cocky phase. He thought I was too young to know anything about acupuncture and was just trying to scam them. So I gave him 3 needles that left him paralyzed on the bed for 3 hours, unable to move a muscle. After that, he was convinced. He spent the rest of that summer trailing me like a puppy, begging me to teach him medicine. I took him into the mountains to pick herbs, up trees to find wild fruit, and into the river to catch fish. He completely shed his arrogant city boy shell around me. But I never expected him to be such a romantic, or a jealous one at that. The next morning, I went to school first. We had a class meeting and a campus job fair. Ugh, in the blink of an eye, I'm a senior. It's a little sad to think about leaving all these fresh-faced underclassmen behind. But Alex keeps such a tight leash on me, I've never even been on a date with one of the campus heartthrobs. I feel like I've missed out on $1 billion. As I walked into the building, I noticed students sneaking glances at me, whispering and pointing at my stomach. I got it. The rumor had already spread to school. Whoever started this, when I find them, I'm going to rip their mouth off. Speaking of which, Sophie and I are in the same year. We went 4 years without saying a word to each other, but she never missed a chance to talk trash about me behind my back. All because I'm prettier than her. I'll give her that. I was never interested in any of the guys at school anyway. With a diamond like Alex setting the standard, my taste is incredibly high. So, thanks to her, I didn't have to reject all those guys myself. I figured I'd just tolerate her for 4 years since we wouldn't see each other after graduation. But then, a routine physical revealed I have a rare blood type. I ended up donating blood to save a pair of twins who'd been in a car accident. The local TV station and newspapers ran stories about my good deed. That's when Sophie's parents showed up, tears in their eyes, clutching my hands and telling me how much I must have suffered all these years. But what a joke. The moment the DNA test confirmed I was their daughter, their attitudes changed. They brought me home, only to immediately start pushing me into an arranged marriage. Apparently, having one daughter to sell wasn't enough. I shook my head, trying to clear away the disgusting memories. I found a seat in the back row by the window, yawned, and started replying to work emails on my phone. Suddenly, I heard my name. I looked up, stunned, to see Sophie, surrounded by her little clique, trashing me. Isabelle's pregnant. She acts so innocent at school, but she's actually wild behind the scenes. Well, what do you expect? She grew up in the countryside. She's crude and uncultured. No one ever taught her any better. As for the baby's father, well, they've already found him. It's that delinquent from her village. I turned on my phone's camera, zoomed in, and got a crystal clear shot of her sneering, contemptuous face. Perfect. She was just handing me the evidence. The bell rang, and our bald-headed homeroom teacher came in. He gave us a few words of encouragement, then started listing the major companies that would be at the job fair. Grant Industries was, of course, at the top of the list. It's one of the country's top private corporations. The benefits and opportunities are incredible, but they only hire the best of the best. In second place was Summit Enterprises. In just 2 years, it went from a startup to a publicly traded company, an unbelievably fast rise. Many people tried to investigate the owner but could only find out that she was a young woman who made her fortune in stocks. They say she's never had a losing stock, earning her the nickname the stock market queen. Summit Enterprises operates in a lot of different sectors. Since most are still in their early stages, their hiring standards aren't as strict as Grant Industries, but their benefits are just as good, if not better. He mentioned a few other good companies, then told everyone to get their resumes ready for the job fair on the main lawn in half an hour. The classroom erupted in excited chatter. I crossed my legs, a lollipop stick hanging from my mouth, and squinted my eyes, enjoying the autumn breeze and listening to everyone praise Summit Enterprises. A warm, fuzzy feeling spread through my chest. Anyone would be happy to hear their child being praised. After all, Summit Enterprises was the business empire I built from the ground up. Of course, I have to admit Alex helped a lot. Okay, a huge lot. Without his guidance, Summit wouldn't be where it is today. It's like that summer years ago, I taught him how to have fun in the countryside. And 5 years later, he stood with me in front of the fanciest skyscraper in the city and showed me what games were fun to play there. As they say, listen to good advice and you'll never go hungry. I'd been lost in this new world, but Alex was an incredible teacher. He taught me everything, step by step. I once asked him with a laugh, "Aren't you afraid of teaching the apprentice so well that the master starves?" He just smiled faintly. My intentions lie elsewhere. Right. The sly old fox. He knew exactly what he wanted as payment from the very beginning. What's so great about being the female CEO of Summit Enterprises? A woman works that hard, but in the end, she still has to get married. I bet she's some ugly hag no man wants, so she has to throw herself into making money. The Qing dynasty ended a long time ago, but clearly, Sophie's brain hasn't caught up. The girls around her chimed in with agreement. I couldn't help but smirk. A degree really doesn't equate to intelligence. Sophie continued her brilliant monologue. I'm telling you, the most important thing for a woman is to find a good man. That's what makes her life complete. She then patted her flat stomach proudly. Do you know whose baby this is? The Grant heirs. Kevin Grant, the future head of the company you're all dying to get into. The whole class was stunned. Sophie, are you for real? Looks like at least one person had a working brain. Sophie puffed out her chest and shot the questioner a disdainful look. Of course, it's real. Grant Industries might seem unattainable to you, but to me, it's just another part of my world. We're all in the same social circle, we hang out all the time. Just you wait. In a few days, you'll see the announcement of my wedding to the heir. I'll let you all get a glimpse of real high society. After a speech like that, everyone was convinced. A new round of flattery and sucking up began. I just wanted to laugh. Sophie was so unafraid of her lies being exposed. Forget the Caldwells, even 10 families like ours couldn't hope to climb into the Grant family's circle. If she had even one decent friend in high society, she'd know that Alex has been chasing me for 10 years. It's an open secret. Is this what it feels like when someone tries to show off in your area of expertise? Just as I was enjoying the show, a commotion erupted at the door. A middle-aged woman was shouting my name at the top of her lungs. Isabelle Caldwell, where are you? I'm here to see my grandbaby. What the hell? The whole class turned to stare at me. Sophie, a triumphant smile on her face, pointed at me. Ma'am, that's Isabelle. I recognized the woman. She was a notorious shrew from the next village over. I remembered her son, too, a local delinquent famous for being in and out of juvie for theft, harassment, and robbery. A real piece of work. The woman's eyes lit up when she saw me. Isabelle, I've been looking all over for you. Come on home with me. What's the point of school? You can come work on the farm with me. We make thousands a year. The classroom burst into laughter. I fought to keep my cool, rubbing my temples. Ma'am, who told you I was pregnant? The woman was brutally honest. A girl named Sophie called and told me. I rushed right over. Come on, let's go home so you can rest. She reached out to grab me, but I quickly stepped back. Ma'am, I don't know your son, and I'm not pregnant. Sophie covered her mouth, feigning a laugh. Isabelle, you didn't watch yourself back then, and now you're trying to dump him because his family is poor? You're so materialistic. How could you be so shallow? The woman chimed in, yeah, honey, you can't be like that. My son is a great catch. What's wrong with him? I almost laughed. You're right, ma'am, I said, nodding. You came looking for your grandchild, right? I'll show you where she is. I walked over to Sophie, grabbed her, and pulled her in front of the woman. I'm not pregnant, but she is. Take her home with you. Sophie shoved me away, screaming, Isabelle, are you insane? I crossed my arms, a cold smile on my face. If I were insane, I would have already ripped that lying mouth of yours off. What's the point of spreading all these rumors? Sophie shot me a disdainful look. What proof do you have that I started any rumors? I saw you at the OB/GYN a few days ago. You were throwing up, too. Are you going to deny that was you? I narrowed my eyes. Let's go to the hospital right now and get tested. You in? Sophie was all bluster. Who do you think you are? Why should I go to the hospital with you? I laughed. Fine. Then I'm calling the police right now to report you for slander. Then I turned to the older woman and warned her, and you're not going anywhere. We're all going down to the station together. The mention of the police station spooked the woman. She scrambled to leave, terrified someone was about to arrest her. Her son was a regular at the local precinct, so she had a healthy fear of it. Sophie watched the woman flee, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. She saw me actually pull out my phone and said arrogantly, Isabelle, don't you think you're being ridiculous? You still don't understand your place in the world. We may be standing here together, but in my eyes, you're nothing but dirt. I'm a cloud in the sky, and you're just mud for people to trample on. I sneered. Great. You can tell that to the police. She wasn't as strong as me. Just as I was about to drag her to the station, another commotion started at the door. And of course, they were calling my name again. Isabelle. My parents were here. They'd come to pick up their precious daughter, Sophie, who was now carrying the Grant heir's child. Sophie immediately switched to damsel in distress mode. Mom, Dad, Isabelle's bullying me. She cried, showing them the red marks on her elbow where I'd grabbed her. I tried to explain. Mom, Dad, Sophie was spreading rumors about me at school, so I was taking her to. My father cut me off, his voice full of rage. Isabelle, why can't you just behave? I told you not to upset Sophie. My mother frowned at me. You useless thing. If I'd known you'd turn out like this, I never would have had you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Sophie shot me a look of triumph, her eyes filled with pity and contempt. I didn't bother explaining further. This kind of family love was nauseating. I just wanted to get out of this house. Back home, as I opened my closet to pack, a thought struck me. I hadn't come back with them hoping for the parental love I never had, so why was I letting them make me so angry? Was I jealous of Sophie? I shook my head. A piece of work like her would just dirty my eyes. And did I need fake, materialistic parents like them? The answer was no. Good. With my head clear, I grabbed my pajamas and went to take a shower. After my shower, I was even more clear-headed. I couldn't just leave. They'd already dragged my name through the mud. If I left now, it would just confirm their lies. So, I was done being patient. This family wasn't going to have a moment's peace. I was in my room reading when my mom burst in. What are you doing pretending to read at a time like this? Get downstairs, now. The Grants are here. I raised an eyebrow. The Grants were here and they didn't give me a heads up. I put my book down and went downstairs to see the show. The house staff was lined up, bowing at a 90-degree angle. My parents' faces were plastered with sycophantic smiles, and Sophie was flushed with excitement. I smirked. I thought it was some big shot, but it was just the Grant family's butler. I knew him pretty well. He'd driven for miles to deliver gifts to me once after Alex and I had a fight. The butler's eyes lit up when he saw me. He was about to speak, but I put a finger to my lips in a should gesture. You don't become the butler for the Grant family without being sharp. His gaze immediately shifted away from me. He gestured for the assistant behind him to place a set of exquisite food containers on the table. The butler said slowly, "We've brought some of your favorite dishes. We hope you enjoy them and that they brighten your mood." My mother squeezed Sophie's arm excitedly. The Grants are so thoughtful. Sophie, you're amazing. My father rubbed his hands together, his eyes glinting with greed, already calculating how much money they'd make once Sophie was married. Sophie lifted her chin proudly. Of course. I put in a lot of effort that night, you know. Her crude comment made even me blush a little. But my parents, far from being ashamed, were proud. My father even took the opportunity to lecture me. Why can't you be more like your sister? You should learn from her. I propped my arm on the table, a lazy, mocking smile on my face. Sophie sat down in the main seat, composed herself, and then said, "You can open them." The butler didn't move. He looked at me. I gave a slight nod. Only then did he begin to open the containers one by one. My smile widened. Avocado toast, fig tarts, matcha chiffon cake, and finally, a simple but elegant bowl of pigeon soup. All my favorites. The smile on Sophie's face vanished. She hated all of this. My mother looked surprised. "Sophie, what's going on?" Sophie looked troubled. He just doesn't know me that well yet. We'll get there. Wow, she was good at spinning a story. She wanted to force herself to eat a few bites, but after a moment of hesitation, she didn't pick up her fork. She was probably afraid of an allergic reaction. The butler ignored her and instead gave me a grand introduction to the pigeon soup. Mrs. Grant had personally simmered it for 6 hours. It was rich, flavorful, and my absolute favorite. My eyes crinkled into a smile. Well, don't mind if I do. It was delicious. Ah, it had been a while since I'd tasted Mrs. Grant's cooking. I missed it. Sophie watched me with disgust. You really have no class. How can you enjoy someone else's food so much? My parents chimed in, no table manners at all. But with food this good in front of me, I ignored them completely. The butler twitched his lips a few times, trying hard to hold back a smile. The butler waited quietly until I finished eating before he started packing up the containers. Sophie, who had been waiting impatiently, finally spoke up. When is Mr. Grant going to be free to come see me? My father added eagerly, if it's convenient, we could go see him. Huh, what a joke. What kind of family has the bride's parents eagerly offering to visit the groom's side? They weren't even afraid of being laughed at. Of course, my parents wouldn't be. They were the joke. The butler lowered his eyes and hinted diplomatically, that all depends on whether someone on your side is willing. Of course, they didn't get it. Sophie piped up excitedly, we're willing. We're very willing. He can come anytime. The sooner, the better. The butler didn't reply, just let out a long sigh. Sophie got anxious and pressed him for what he meant. My parents were also getting antsy and even tried to slip him a thick red envelope, but the butler didn't even glance at it. I let out a soft laugh. It was just too funny. Feeling good after a free meal and a good show, I unblocked Alex. Of course, he immediately video called me. His voice was laced with a hint of grievance. Irene, you haven't talked to me in 3 days. I licked my lips and cooed, Alex. Instantly, Alex's face lit up. Huh, men. So easy to please. I was very satisfied with today's meal. I've decided to unblock you for 3 days. Alex immediately pushed his luck. Then I'll send food every day. I tilted my head and said sweetly, dream on. He laughed again. His sense of humor was so easy to trigger. It was always funny to me when people said Alex was cold and unapproachable. Suddenly, Alex sat up straight, his expression serious. There's a piece of land in the West End up for auction tomorrow. It's by the mountains and water, perfect for a wellness retreat. I opened my laptop and did a quick search. My eyes lit up. It really is a prime piece of real estate. But the competition will be fierce. I'm a little short on the price. Alex raised an eyebrow, a slight smile on his lips. That land is yours. I've already decided. His words were light, but they sent my heart fluttering. This domineering CEO type was totally my weakness. I can accept a handout, but I need to know just how big the gap is between us. After hanging up, I called my CFO to see how much liquid capital the company had and to estimate how much of a loan we could get from the bank. When you owe the bank $100,000, the bank owns you. But when you owe the bank $10 billion, you own the bank. It's so true. I estimated that to secure the land, I'd be short at least $3 billion. So, the current gap between me and Alex was about $3 billion. I still had a lot of work to do. Alex offered to pick me up, but I said no, we'd just meet at the auction. We were both on a tight schedule. But he insisted his new car was too cool not to show off, and he had to take me for a spin. And yeah, a pink sports car covered in cute cherry Morocco Chan decals was, admittedly, pretty cool. I sat in the passenger seat, holding a bouquet of pink roses. Alex started his pouting routine. Irene, you've been ignoring me. He sounded so pathetic, like a big sad puppy. I just held up my phone and the bouquet and started taking selfies, shrugging with a smile. What can I say? You get too jealous. Behind his back, we all called him the king of jealousy. Alex immediately confessed his sins. I have deeply reflected on my mistakes and promise I will never do it again. I shot him a sidelong glance. Do you believe that? Alex grinned like a fox. Of course. I gave him a thumbs up. Wow. You even lie to yourself. It had been a while since I'd been to an auction of this caliber. Then again, events like this only happen 5 or 6 times a year, max. Alex used to love taking me to auctions because he thought I looked cute when I raised the bidding paddle. I was speechless. This auction was intense. I had predicted the land would go for around 60 billion, but a few oil tycoons just back from overseas drove the price up to 90 billion. Like the cute younger guy sitting in front of me. He kept raising his paddle and then turning around to smile at me. Interesting. And just like that, Alex, who had just sworn he wouldn't get jealous, immediately wrapped his arm around my shoulder. The next time the kid turned to look at me, Alex leaned in and planted a loud kiss on my cheek. The kid's eyes fell, and he didn't raise his paddle again. I was about to give Alex a piece of my mind, but then he just handed me the deed to the land, a gentle, innocent smile on his face. Irene, congratulations on successfully acquiring the property. Okay, I forgave him. It's not that I don't have principles. It's just that he was offering too much. Seeing that I wasn't mad anymore, Alex started his brainwashing campaign. Irene, let me tell you, these younger guys are nice to look at, but when it comes to marriage, you need someone mature, stable, and charming. Like me. I licked my lips and looked at him. This man, he really was charming. It was only during our candlelight dinner that I remembered Sophie and Kevin. I asked him curiously. Did Kevin really sleep with Sophie? I was skeptical. I'd known Kevin since he was a kid. I knew his character. Even drunk, he shouldn't have lost that much self-control. Alex looked unconcerned. I don't know. He's on a business trip in South Africa right now. I couldn't believe it. Kevin's in South Africa. Don't you guys only have oil and mining operations there? He's a VP of Foreign Trade. What's he doing in South Africa? Alex took an elegant sip of his wine, a sly smile on his face. Because he made fun of me for being heartbroken. Kevin, your future aunt is so sorry. After consulting with 3 different architectural firms, I finally had the blueprint for my dream wellness retreat. The designs were approved by the state in less than 2 weeks. But instead of starting construction right away, I printed the blueprints into beautiful brochures and distributed them to the city's rich and powerful. In no time, I had secured a massive amount of investment. A high-end wellness retreat would be the first of its kind in the city. Everyone was clamoring to get in. Every family has elderly relatives, after all. Alright, now construction could officially begin. After all that, I was finally looking forward to sleeping in, but I'd barely been in bed for an hour when my mom came in. I'd forgotten to lock the door. Not a good habit. She yanked the covers off me and scolded, "What time is it? All you do is sleep. Get downstairs, the Grants are here again." I was annoyed. So they're here. What's it got to do with me? My mom was impatient. He said he can't deliver the gifts until everyone is here. I don't know why he needs you downstairs. Ha. There's a lot you don't know. The Grants are here for me. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on a robe, and went downstairs. Great. It was the same grand spectacle as last time. The staff was lined up to welcome them, my family of 3 stood by, wagging their tails, and the Grant family butler stood with his eyes downcast, saying nothing. "Mr. Butler, what have you brought this time? We already sent over a list of foods my Sophie doesn't eat. Did you receive it? Sophie and we are all here. Isabelle is just an outsider from the countryside. She's crude. You don't need to wait for her. My Sophie likes jade, gold, villas, and stocks. Their shamelessness made me laugh. The butler finally relaxed when he saw me. Mr. Grant said you've been working hard and have lost weight. He wants you to eat well and take care of yourself. Sophie proudly patted her stomach. He knows how hard pregnancy is. My father fawned. Mr. Grant is so thoughtful. We'll take good care of Sophie. This isn't just the Grant family's little heir, he's our precious grandson too. My mother pulled me away from the dining table. Don't you know Sophie needs to eat? You're ruining her appetite. She snapped. I wasn't angry. I just went and sat on the sofa, crossing my legs. The butler immediately placed the food containers on the coffee table and set them out in front of me. Instantly, a delicious aroma filled the air, and my mouth started to water. Sophie stood up angrily. What's wrong with you? I'm sitting over here, and you put the food over there. How am I supposed to eat? The butler completely ignored her, standing respectfully by my side with his head bowed. My father tried to placate Sophie. Sophie, you can't get angry right now. What if it hurts the baby? He probably just thinks that chair is too hard for you. It's more comfortable to eat on the sofa. I ducked my head, my shoulders shaking with laughter. This was better than any comedy show. My mother helped Sophie to the sofa, but the moment she saw the food, she frowned. Didn't I say I don't like these dishes? Why did you bring them again? Sophie was angry and was about to swipe the food off the table. My mother stopped her, comforting her. They probably didn't get the list we sent last time. It's okay. We'll write another one for him to take back now. I took a large bite of beef. It was so satisfying. The Grants were picky about food, so their chefs were top tier. It's no exaggeration to say that Michelin-starred chefs you couldn't get a reservation for anywhere else were a dime a dozen in their kitchen. My mother quickly jotted down a list of foods Sophie couldn't eat and handed it to the butler. He took it without a glance and stuffed it into his pocket. I knew that piece of paper would end up in the recycling bin outside the neighborhood later. My mother nodded in satisfaction. Don't worry, Sophie. Next time, they'll bring all your favorite foods. Sophie asked anxiously, so when is he coming? My belly is getting so big, I won't be able to fit into a pretty wedding dress. At this, my parents also got anxious. But they had been pushing for days, and the butler never gave them a straight answer. In recognition of Alex's hard work helping me out lately, I decided to be generous and send him a text, I'm free for a bit. Alex replied instantly, Roger that. A moment later, the butler's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and then said with a smile, would tomorrow be a convenient time for a visit? Instantly, a shriek of joy from Sophie echoed through the living room. He's finally coming to see me. He's finally coming. My mother was so excited she had tears in her eyes. My Sophie is so amazing. She's bringing so much honor to our family. My father immediately started calling his friends, inviting them over for dinner tomorrow to meet his future son-in-law, the Grant heir. I couldn't wait to see how tomorrow would play out. It was going to be fun. That night, Sophie invited her friends from school over for dinner. She bragged about how she was about to become Mrs. Grant Jr. and how the entire Grant empire would one day be hers. Her friends flattered her, saying they'd need her to look out for them in the future. Sophie, of course, readily agreed. Then she couldn't resist taking a swipe at me. What's the point of a woman being a good student? In the end, we all have to get married. Marrying a good husband is better than anything. One of her lackeys, seeing me eating chicken wings in the corner, sneered, exactly. Look at Isabelle. She was such a great student, won national scholarships every year, but what's the point? She still can't find a job. Yeah, they're both Caldwells, but look at the difference. One is marrying the Grant heir, and the other is marrying some country bumpkin. I spat out a chicken bone and gave them a little smile. As I recall, you all applied to Summit Enterprises, right? They nodded, then mocked me, what, you want to get into Summit too? Their entrance exam is really tough. Even if you passed, showing up to an interview with a big pregnant belly would make you a laughingstock. I just smiled and shrugged. Well, good luck to you. Since I graduated from the same university, HR had specifically recruited a few of my fellow alumni. By sheer coincidence, they were among them. I wondered what they'd think when they saw me as their interviewer. Today, I cleared my schedule and just lazed around on the living room sofa, watching TV and the festive atmosphere in the house. They had even put up happy couple banners. Sophie pointed at me imperiously. You are not allowed to come out later. Your unmarried pregnancy is a disgrace to our family. I glanced down at my own tiny waist, then at her protruding belly, and snorted. Are you sure you're not talking about yourself? Sophie sneered. Who do you think you are, comparing yourself to me? I could have you thrown out of this house with a single word, you know. I licked my lips with a smile. Oh, I believe you. Only then did Sophie nod, satisfied. Then go hide in your room. If you do, and I'm in a good mood, I might let you stay. After all, you know what kind of life you had before. My life at the Grants was pretty great, actually. Aside from Alex being a little clingy, everything was perfect. Of course, it wasn't as entertaining as being here. This place was a constant comedy show. As I was getting up to get a drink, I heard a chorus of jeers from behind me. Turns out, a few of Sophie's sycophant friends were still here. Standing at the door was a country woman in an ill-fitting padded jacket, carrying a cheap plastic woven bag. She was grinning obsequiously. Isabelle, the settlement money from the factory came through. $1.3 million. I brought it all. Marrying a city college girl is expensive. With that, she untied the bag, revealing stacks of red $100 bills. The students gasped in unison. My parents rushed over, their eyes gleaming at the sight of the money, their faces alight with greed. My mom, who usually had a thing about cleanliness, grabbed the dirty plastic bag without a second thought and carried it into the house. Sophie hugged the bag of money, thrilled. This is all my dowry money. Now let's see who dares to look down on me. Forget 3 million. Even with 10 times that, she couldn't dream of marrying into the Grant family. The Grant's requirements for a daughter-in-law had nothing to do with money. It was all about character, personality, and education. My mother's face was creased with a huge smile. Isabelle is finally useful for something. It wasn't a total waste bringing her back. I smirked. Oh, really? I hope you don't regret saying that. So, I've paid the money. Can I take my daughter-in-law home now? The woman rubbed her hands together eagerly, her eyes sizing me up like I was a piece of merchandise. My father glanced at me dismissively and waved his hand. All right, Isabelle, pack your things and go back to the countryside with her. Sophie shot me a triumphant look. What are you waiting for? Go with your mother-in-law. And don't come back. We don't have poor relatives like you. I had to laugh. I don't know her son, I'm not pregnant, and I didn't take the money. Why should I marry him? The woman immediately threw herself on the floor and started wailing. Oh, you shameless hussy. You seduced my son and got pregnant, and now you won't marry him. My precious grandbaby, abandoned. My heart aches as a grandmother. I know you think my family is poor, but we spent over $1 million to marry you. Who in the countryside spends that much on a wife? We could buy 1,000 sows with that money. If you don't come with me today, I'm not leaving. It was a classic public tantrum. The students standing around were covering their mouths and snickering, pointing at me. I calmly pulled a lab report from my pocket and held it in front of the woman. This is from a hospital checkup. It clearly states I have a stomach bug, not a baby. Then I pointed to my waist. A 3-month pregnant belly is not this slim. My tiny waist was the result of daily yoga, and it showed. The woman froze. She'd had children, she knew what a pregnant body looked like. I continued, and you should know that slander is a crime. It might not get you years in prison, but a month in jail is definitely on the table. The woman backed down. She scrambled up from the floor, wiping her tears. So what now? I pointed to the bag of money. You take your money back, and I'll pretend this never happened. Otherwise, I'm calling the police. Terrified, the woman went to grab the money and leave. But Sophie wasn't about to let it go. She clutched the bag tightly, glaring at me. Isabelle, even if you're not pregnant, your reputation is ruined. You'll never marry into a good family now. My mother chimed in, that's right, Isabelle. Don't be so difficult. Sophie is marrying the heir. She needs a proper dowry, or they'll look down on her. Things have already gone this far. Just go with this woman to the countryside and live a good life with her son. I shrugged nonchalantly. Things have already gone this far. So let's go to the police station, file a report, and find out who started the rumors. They can take responsibility. The woman immediately distanced herself. It was all Sophie. She said you were carrying my grandchild and told me to hurry up and propose. Sophie was defiant. I was just joking. Now, I'm carrying the grand heir's child. This baby is my golden ticket. What can you do to me? My father nodded in agreement. Exactly. The baby Sophie is carrying is our family's lifeline. Isabelle, stop making trouble. I sneered, crossing my arms. And why should I? My father, furious at being publicly contradicted, roared, because you're my daughter. You'll marry whoever I tell you to marry. I gave him a thumbs up. And what makes you the law? My father's face turned beet red. He raised his hand to slap me. I could hear the whoosh of air and knew how much force was behind that slap. Beside me, Sophie's face was twisted in a gleeful grimace. Just as I was about to lean back and dodge the blow, a cold, sharp voice cut through the air from the doorway. Stop. Alex entered, followed by a procession of assistants carrying gift boxes. His face was a cold mask as he stared at my father. What do you think you're doing? His voice was icy, sending a chill through the room. My father immediately deflated, fawning, Mr. Grant, I was just disciplining my daughter. What brings you here today? Sophie frantically scanned the crowd, her face falling in disappointment. Where's Kevin? My parents were stunned for a moment, then their faces split into wide grins. Right. Kevin was just the heir, but the real power in the Grant family was his uncle, Alex Grant. For him to come in person meant he must value Sophie even more. My parents' faces were all wrinkles from smiling so hard. My mother gushed, Mr. Grant, you must be tired from your journey. Please, sit down and rest. My father rubbed his hands together, sputtering with excitement. Yes, yes. If we had known you were coming yourself, we would have met you at the door. Please forgive our rudeness. Alex completely ignored them. He walked straight to me and whispered in my ear, are you still mad? He was deliberately using that seductive tone to charm me. I couldn't help but smile and give a slight nod. It was my signal that his heroic rescue was perfectly timed. His voice was so low that no one else heard, assuming he was just passing by me on his way to the sofa. Alex had a powerful presence. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and sank into the sofa, draping an arm over the back with an air of relaxed authority, as if he owned the place. I'm here today to deliver a gift from my mother. As he spoke, the assistants placed the gifts on the table. The boxes were opened to reveal exquisite jade bracelets, a large carved jade statue of guanine, and a magnificent blue sapphire. The people around us gasped. Sophie was mesmerized, practically drooling. My parents' eyes were also filled with awe and greed. This was the wealth of the Grant family. Even a simple introductory gift was this extravagant. Alex looked at me and smiled softly. Are you satisfied? Sophie nodded eagerly. Satisfied, very satisfied. She picked up a bracelet and started to put it on, but Alex's voice cut through the air, cold as ice. Put it down. Sophie flinched and quickly put the bracelet back. Her eyes welled up with tears. Weren't these for me? What's wrong with me trying one on? My mother chimed in, her voice full of pity for Sophie. That's right, these are all for Sophie. Alex raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in his eyes as he looked at them. Ha! You really have some nerve. My father asked, bewildered, what do you mean? Aren't you here to propose to Sophie? Alex looked up, studying them carefully. Are you all mentally deficient? His words plunged the large living room into a stunned silence. No one dared to even breathe. I casually picked up the jade guanine and played with it. My mother hissed, Isabelle, put that down. If you break it, 10 of you couldn't afford to replace it. I just laughed and deliberately tossed it in the air a little. Their eyes practically popped out of their heads in terror. Just as my father was about to speak, Alex said slowly, forget 10 of her. My Irene could smash 100 of them if she wanted to. He then looked at me with doting eyes. Irene, do you like the gifts this time? My eyes crinkled into a smile. They're okay. The quality is pretty good this time. Alex nodded, satisfied. As long as you like them. Everyone was dumbfounded. My father was the first to recover, asking in shock, Isabelle, how do you know Mr. Grant? I toyed with the jewelry, looking at the pale faces of my mother and Sophie, and smiled sweetly. We met in the countryside. It's been about 10 years, I think. Alex corrected me from the side. 13 years and 2 months. I couldn't help but laugh. You have a great memory. Alex raised his eyebrows, looking a little proud. Yes. And I'm good at math, too. In other words, a bit of a lovesick fool. Alex stayed for lunch, which delighted my parents. My mother even tried to go into the kitchen to cook, but the butler politely stopped her. Ma'am, we've brought our own chefs. They're all accustomed to Miss Isabelle's tastes. Please, go and rest. Good thing the kitchen was big enough, or all 12 chefs might not have fit. During lunch, Alex kept putting food on my plate, even deboning the fish for me. My father said fawningly, Mr. Grant, you're so good to our Irene. Ha! I glanced up at him. It was the first time he'd ever called me Irene. Alex looked quite pleased with himself. Of course. We've been spoiling Irene since she was a child. If I wasn't good to her, my own mother would disown me. He said it jokingly, but everyone understood the implication. The Grant family adored me. My mother tried to probe. Mr. Grant, why didn't young Mr. Kevin come with you? Alex was busy serving me soup and replied casually, why would he come? My mother quickly explained, to see our Sophie, of course. She's been waiting at home for him every day. Alex didn't even look up. Oh, is that so? And then he dropped the subject. Sophie's eyes were swollen. She'd gone to cry after being humiliated over the bracelet and now, being humiliated again, her eyes were red. But she didn't dare cry in front of Alex. She just muttered that she was full and went upstairs. Her classmates, who had been eating quietly, couldn't help but stifle their laughter. Even though they were all sucking up to Sophie, they were secretly delighted to see her taken down a peg. She was usually so arrogant and bossy with them. I smirked. Soon, Sophie would be the laughingstock of the entire class. After lunch, my father personally brewed a cup of his finest aged tea for Alex. But Alex just took a sip and frowned. This tea is from last year. It's been well preserved, but it still has a hint of a musty smell. My father's face turned red with embarrassment. My mother then cut up a fruit platter, but Alex took the fork and fed it all to me. Before he left, he ruffled my hair, looking reluctant to go. Call me when you have time. I smiled and waved. All right, go on. After seeing Alex off, I was about to go upstairs, but my mother grabbed my hand, her voice sickeningly sweet. Irene, tell Mom and Dad all about your relationship with the Grants. I gave her a vague answer. We've known each other for a long time. They've always been good to me. My father was excited. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I scoffed. You never asked. My parents' faces turned a mixture of green and white. It was true, they had never asked. My mother chided, well, you should have told us. I sneered. And if I had, would you have listened? My parents nodded eagerly, their voices full of affection. Of course. We may not have raised you, but you're still our flesh and blood. Mom has missed you every single day. Seeing you so successful now makes us so proud. I'm sure even a professional actor couldn't change faces that fast. I just smiled faintly. Then why didn't you believe me when I said I wasn't pregnant? A flash of unease crossed my father's face. That's all in the past. I couldn't be bothered with them anymore. I went upstairs to catch up on my sleep. Happy days always fly by. The wellness retreat was under construction, and I'd already set my sights on a new venture, a chain of themed hotels for couples. What can I say? I have to make money. My friends in my social circle were all baffled as to why I kept turning down Alex's proposals. The reason was simple, I didn't want to be sheltered under his wing. I wanted to have the confidence and standing to be his equal. A relationship between equals is much more interesting. And Alex understood me completely. He'd always supported me from the sidelines. This time, when he heard I wanted to build themed hotels, he immediately sent his design team to discuss a partnership. He was also very interested in the concept. It was a huge trend abroad, but there were very few decent themed hotels in our country. This would be our first true joint venture. Neither of us was short on cash, and our goals were aligned. We quickly signed a cooperation agreement. The day the news went public, both our companies' stocks soared. Grant Industries saw a 10% jump, while Summit Enterprises shot up by 60%. I definitely rode his coattails on that one. The business papers described our partnership as a collaboration of titans. Other corporations that had been interested in the themed hotel market quickly backed off. This was a result neither of us could have achieved on our own. I was very pleased with the outcome. The company started another round of hiring, which reminded me of Sophie's little sycophants. It was time to make some time to interview them. Alex was puzzled. Irene, what's so interesting about a few interviews? Our luncheon today is very important. He was right. It was the launch party for our public partnership. All the big names in business would be there. As the hosts, it was important for us to be there early to greet everyone. But the thought of the looks on the faces of those girls who looked down on me every day when they saw me, that was just too good to pass up. The first 3 rounds of interviews at Summit Enterprises were written exams. Then there were 3 rounds of in-person interviews. And I was the final round. In the Summit Enterprises conference room, I sat in the center seat, watching the jaws of Sophie's lackeys drop. A small smile played on my lips. One of them pointed at me, stuttering, Isabelle, what are you doing sitting there? I leaned back in my chair, casually twirling a pen. I'm the interviewer, of course. Her face was a mask of disbelief. You're the head interviewer for Summit? In most companies, being the head interviewer meant you held a high position. I smiled and shook my head. Guess again. She let out a sigh of relief. You scared me. The woman next to me then added with a smile, this is our company's CEO. It's because you and our CEO went to the same university that we expanded our recruitment there. Instantly, the girl's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor. I didn't even have to do anything. Their nerves were shot. They could barely string a sentence together in front of me and were immediately disqualified. I was in a great mood as I got into Alex's car after the interviews. Alex smiled. What's so funny? I told him what had happened, and he started laughing too. That's what you get for being so low-key all the time. I shrugged, looking smug. What can I say? I enjoy being the wolf in sheep's clothing. That was something he had taught me. A successful businessperson never reveals all their cards. Suddenly, Alex looked at me, puzzled. Why did you suddenly stop pretending? I narrowed my eyes, feeling the wind from the open window on my face, and smiled. Because today is the day of the big reveal. Last night, I'd overheard Sophie at the dinner table saying she was going to find Kevin at the luncheon today. That meant she would definitely see me. The game was up. Watching her family act like a bunch of clowns was getting old. And most importantly, because of the stock surge, my net worth had skyrocketed. I was now at the top of the financial pyramid, able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Alex. I had thought that would take at least 3 years. The luncheon was a grand affair. The 1,000-person banquet hall was packed. There were people at the door checking invitations. You couldn't get in unless you had a certain level of status. I still remember the first time Alex brought me to an event like this, 10 years ago. He told me the food here was amazing, all flown in from abroad, and just a little better than roasted sparrows. I was instantly captivated by the delicious food. After that, he would come to the countryside every winter and summer break to pick me up and would solemnly introduce me to all his friends. This is my good friend, Isabelle. Back then, they were all nice to me, but I could see the condescension in their eyes. I wasn't good enough for him. As time went on, the same people who had looked down on me now addressed me respectfully as Ms. Caldwell. Many people whispered behind my back that I had only made it because of Alex, that without him, I'd still be a country girl. They were right. So I worked my butt off to learn how to survive in the big city, and I became better than all of them. Mr. Grant, Ms. Caldwell, congratulations. Your partnership is making huge waves in the industry. Usually, when titans collaborate, it's between mid-level companies, or a high-level and a mid-level. A partnership between 2 top-tier companies was rare. It meant they were tying their fates together. The short-term benefits were huge, but in the long run, power struggles were inevitable. It could easily end in a bitter feud. Unless there was absolute trust, or a marriage alliance. Alex smiled and nodded, his gaze soft as he looked at me. Yes. And this is just the beginning. I smiled back. I'm looking forward to our future collaborations. They all raised their glasses with knowing smiles. I was sure they'd be buying more of our stock after the party. My feet were tired, so I took a break. I sat on a sofa, nibbling on some fruit. Alex sat beside me, his chin propped on his hand, just staring at me, his deep eyes full of love. His gaze made my cheeks burn. I tried to change the subject. Are you really not worried about our partnership? Alex leaned in closer and gently wiped a smudge of sauce from the corner of my mouth with his handkerchief. His voice was low and sexy. Irene, are you underestimating my love for you? He had never been so direct with his feelings before. He was usually so ambiguous and gentle, always staying just outside the boundaries I had drawn, polite and restrained. But now, his gaze was scorching. It was as if I was the prey he was determined to catch, and he had spent 13 years weaving a net of love and tenderness, and I was walking into it willingly. Suddenly, a commotion broke out in the banquet hall. A security guard came over and whispered, "Mr. Grant, there's a woman here causing a scene, claiming she's pregnant with Mr. Kevin's child. Should we have them removed?" Alex looked at me, his smile dazzling and indulgent. Let's go watch the show. Kevin was back today. He'd lost a lot of weight and was tanned. He'd gone from a pale, delicate rich boy to a healthy, muscular man. He actually looked pretty handsome. But he wasn't in the hall at the moment, probably in the restroom. The security guard saw me and said respectfully, "Ms. Caldwell, they won't listen. They refuse to wait on the sofas and insist on making a scene here." The title Ms. Caldwell made my parents and Sophie freeze. Today, I was wearing a custom-made, diamond-studded champagne-colored gown, my hair in an elegant updo. I exuded an aura of power and wealth, a far cry from my usual casual attire. My mother said in shock, "Isabelle?" I smiled and nodded. "Yes. Let me take you to the VIP room to rest. Kevin will be here shortly." They had been intimidated by the high-end atmosphere, but seeing me gave them a burst of confidence. Now they were even more determined not to leave. Sophie's eyes were red with jealousy. Why are you at this party? We didn't even get an invitation. People nearby started to snicker and whisper. Is there anyone who doesn't know the CEO of Summit Enterprises? They're not in our circle. Of course, a commoner wouldn't know Ms. Caldwell. Yeah, look at their clothes. They look so cheap. Definitely not one of us. Instantly, my parents' and Sophie's faces turned beet red. They had spent a fortune on top luxury brand clothing for today's event, but they were all ready to wear pieces, not custom-made. To this crowd, they might as well have been from a thrift store. Sophie pretended not to hear and stuck her neck out. So what if you're Ms. Caldwell? I'm carrying the child of Kevin Grant, the heir to the Grant Corporation. That line had some weight. The murmuring stopped. Sophie immediately regained her confidence and looked down her nose at me. You're just the CEO of Summit Enterprises. How can you compare to me? Ha ha ha. Someone couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hey, lady, do you not read the news or go online? Ms. Caldwell's net worth is on par with Alex Grant's now. And the entire Grant family adores Ms. Caldwell. Alex Grant has been chasing her for over a decade. If you really want to marry into the Grant family, you'll need Ms. Caldwell's approval. Yeah, where did this girl come from? It's hilarious. Sophie's face turned a kaleidoscope of colors. She shouted, if you say one more word, I'll make you pay when I marry Kevin. Just then, an angry voice cut through the crowd. Who's spreading rumors about being pregnant with my child? The crowd parted to reveal Kevin, his face contorted in a furious scowl. He strode forward, his intimidating presence silencing Sophie instantly. Alex sauntered over to my side and whispered, I just asked Kevin. He said it never happened. My smile widened. I had expected as much. This show was about to get unexpectedly interesting. Sophie was scared and didn't dare to shout anymore. She just said pitifully, Kevin, you can't do this. You were drunk that night. I went to your room. The lights were off, and it was dark, but you were so gentle. Everyone leaned in, their ears perked to catch the gossip. Kevin frowned. What hotel? When? Be specific. I'll have someone pull the security footage right now. Sophie recounted the story in detail. She had been at the hotel for dinner that night and saw him drinking with friends. He went into room 302, so she snuck in the middle of the night. She told it with such conviction that everyone started to believe her. Before Kevin could say anything, a large woman in a security guard's uniform grabbed Sophie by the hair and sneered. Oh, I thought you looked familiar. You're the one who snuck into my husband's room that night. So, how was he? Pretty good, right? The crowd erupted in laughter. Sophie, of course, didn't believe it and screamed like a madwoman, no way. You're a liar. Soon, the hotel's security footage was pulled up. Kevin had only been in room 302 for 3 minutes before leaving and going to sleep in room 305 across the hall. At 2 a.m., Sophie, dressed very revealingly, pushed open the door to room 302 and didn't leave until 4 a.m. At 7 a.m., a large, 40-year-old man in a security guard's uniform casually walked out of the room. And there it was. The truth was out. Sophie hadn't slept with a rich heir, but with a 40-year-old security guard. Kevin was furious and said he was going to sue Sophie. What a coincidence. So was I. I pulled out the video I'd taken at school of Sophie slandering me and gave it to Kevin, asking him to have his lawyers handle it for me. With irrefutable evidence against her, Sophie collapsed onto the floor. The security guard's wife dragged her by the hair, ready to take her to the hospital. How dare you sneak into my husband's room? You're going to pay for his emotional distress. You took advantage of my husband, and now you're trying to pass off his bastard child as someone else's? Let's go. We're going to the hospital to get rid of that baby. Sophie completely lost it. In the struggle, she fell hard. She tried to beg my parents for help, but they were already avoiding her like the plague. They just stood there and watched as she was beaten until she was covered in blood. The Caldwell family was now a complete mess, which was highly entertaining. When Sophie was taken to the hospital, it was too late to save the baby. The heavy bleeding forced the doctors to perform a hysterectomy, leaving her unable to have children for the rest of her life. The day she woke up from surgery, the entire Grant family legal team was already waiting for her. Sophie's casual slanders were now coming back to haunt her. It was time for her to pay the price. As for the Caldwells, they were never very wealthy to begin with. With Sophie's extravagant spending, the family's money had long been gone. My father couldn't even make payroll for his company's employees. So, of course, they came to me, begging and groveling for forgiveness. But I was too busy to watch their little drama. A real shame. But I never expected them to sue me, claiming that as their biological daughter, I was legally obligated to support them. When I received the court summons, I had to laugh. I brought my company's entire legal department with me to give them a little lesson on the law. My parents knelt before me, banging their heads on the floor. Irene, we know we were wrong before. Please, help us. If you don't, your father is threatening to jump off a building. I crouched down in front of them with a smile. Why don't you marry Sophie off to that creep from her hometown? His family has over $1 million. That should be enough to get you through this. My parents' eyes lit up. I knew what they would do. Poor Sophie. But didn't she say she wanted to repay them? Well, her wish was about to come true. As for my snobby classmates, after they found out I was the CEO of Summit Enterprises, they all started singing my praises. Too bad for them, I'm not a fool like Sophie. Delete, block, the whole 9 yards. Later, I heard the Caldwells really did try to sell Sophie off for a good price. But with her reputation in tatters, even the women from her village looked down on her. No one was willing to pay even $30,000 for her. The Caldwell family eventually went bankrupt. To survive, Sophie had to sell herself on the streets, ended up with a host of diseases, and went down a dark path. As for my parents, they ended up old, alone, and with no one to care for them. All their scheming led to them reaping what they sowed, and their lives were no better than Sophie's. Later, Alex proposed to me. He offered me 50% of the stock in our themed hotel chain, a gift worth billions. So generous. But I wasn't moved. Money? I have my own. But then his mother brought me more of her pigeon soup. Irene, please say yes to my Alex. When you two fight now, I can't help you. But if you're married, I'll have a perfectly good reason to get involved. I smiled as I fished a diamond ring out from the bottom of the soup. Mrs. Grant, this is playing dirty. She just laughed. But you have to admit, it's delicious, right? I wrapped my arm around hers and nodded. Yes, before I could finish, Alex had already slipped the ring onto my finger. Wife. Kevin also started acting cute, squatting in front of me. Aunt Irene, please, I'm begging you, say yes to my uncle. I don't want to go back to South Africa ever again. He looked so pathetic, he was about to cry. Looks like South Africa really wasn't a nice place. So I ruffled his hair and said, reluctantly, fine. After all, I'd practically watched this kid grow up. I couldn't bear to see him suffer. I really am a good aunt. On a beautiful, sunny day, with not a cloud in the sky, Alex and I finally got married. The wedding was a grand affair, held on the engagement gift Alex had given me. Yes, he gave me a heart-shaped island. It took him a full 8 years to buy and develop it. There are no seasons here, just an eternal spring, my favorite. He said I was the best Isabelle in the world, so I deserved the best things in the world. Oh, and I always forgot to tell him. The truth is, I fell for him the first moment I saw him. For the rest of our lives, my Mr. Grant, let's take it slow, together.